Authentic fear versus cinematic fear. Are they really any different? Cinematic fear is just as traumatizing and debilitating as real-life fear. Rational fear. Rational fear is the fear or apprehension that you have when you're walking alone on the street in Elmira. Irrational fear. Irrational fear is fear that has no legitimate basis. An example is compulsions that individuals with obsessive-compulsive disorder suffer from. Media-manufactured fear. Media-manufactured fear is the fear that media outlets, such as news stations, create when there is no legitimate basis for this level of fear either.
It's Sunday, October 12th, 2014. As we issue this emergency alert report, it has now been confirmed in Dallas, Texas, the site of patient Zero's death last week. A nurse who was treating him at the Presbyterian Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, has tested positive for contracting Ebola, the deadly virus ravaging hundreds of thousands of people right now, potentially could infect millions in Africa, and now it has spread in the United States, just as it spread last week to another nurse, a healthcare worker in Madrid.
The World Health Organization has declared a swine flu pandemic as the disease continues to spread around the world.
Normal fear, also known as suspense. Suspense is the state or feeling of being excited or anxious about what may happen.
Hello?
Why don't you want to talk to me?
Who is this?
You tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Uh-huh.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween.
Nothing horrifying is actually happening here, but the viewer is on edge and doesn't know what to expect next from the mysterious caller. Gory horror, also known as torture porn. Torture porn is the trend in horror movies that consists of focusing on the kidnapping and torturing of helpless victims. Sublime horror. Sublime horror is when filmmakers focus more on the beauty aspect of the art rather than being bloody just to be bloody. This is more typical in older movies because they didn't have the technology to create a monster that is frightening based solely on the image. Let's look at the biological response that fear elicits. When a threat is perceived, the autonomic nervous system automatically puts the body on alert. The adrenal cortex then automatically releases stress hormones. The heart beats harder and more rapidly. Breathing becomes more rapid. The thyroid gland stimulates the metabolism, and larger muscles receive more oxygenated blood. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to the expert, Abigail Marsh, the associate professor in the Department of Psychology at Georgetown University.
The sensation of fear, and more importantly, what is fear exactly?
So fear is the expectation or the anticipation of possible harm. When you learn to fear something, you are learning to fear something that triggers the actual threat or that signals that the actual threat is impending. The body is highly sensitive to the possibility of threat, and so there's multiple pathways that bring that fear information into your brain. So let's say that you're alone in your house at night, it's dark, and you hear a crash. The nerves in your ears that transduce that sound is the first part of the nervous system in action. That signal is relayed to the thalamus, which is the sort of relay station in the middle of your brain, and then directly to the amygdala via this sort of rough and ready route.
The amygdala is such a critical component of the fear response because it releases several key neurotransmitters in the body. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that nerve cells in the brain known as neurons use to communicate with each other in the nervous system. The most important neurotransmitter in the fear response is called glutamate.
And the actions of glutamate in the amygdala in response to the fearful thing that you've heard set off this cascade of other responses. The information is relayed both to a region called periaqueductal gray, which is deep in the recesses of the very ancient brain. And that's the region that is responsible for two classic fear behaviors, one of which is freezing, and the other one of which is jumping. So because it's such an ancient part of the brain, these are actually quite difficult responses to control. The information is also relayed to a region called the hypothalamus, and that is a region that controls the autonomic nervous system, which part of which is what people know as the fight or flight branch of the nervous system, or a sympathetic nervous system. And that controls all these other body responses that we think of as related to fear, like heart rate going up, blood pressure going up, et cetera. What happens when the hypothalamus sends the signal down into the body that something scary has happened via the autonomic nerves? It goes to the adrenal glands, and they pump out both cortisol and adrenaline.
The fear response is key to our survival. Without it, imminent danger might go unnoticed, failing to launch the fight or flight response that could save us from harm. The fear response leads to a release of adrenaline, which gives our body an extra jolt of energy and an increased heart rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rate. It also releases glucose into the bloodstream, giving you an extra boost in case you need to get the heck out of there. Next, cortisol keeps the sympathetic nervous system up and running. This system is responsible for the fight or flight response, sustaining that heightened sense of energy and alertness received from the adrenaline rush.
The stages of the fear response that are mediated by these structures are, at low levels, the initial response to hearing something scary is usually vigilance and freezing. And there's an evolutionary reason for this, which is that movement will often release predatory attacks in predators. If your nervous system figures out that something really bad is actually happening and you need to get out of there, it ramps up the fear response and you move into flight, so getting out of there. The final response that you might see in a frightened animal or person, if the threat is so close you can no longer flee, it's fighting. If more detailed processing by the brain determines that what has happened isn't actually that scary, it downregulates the amygdala response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of the sort of opposite side of the autonomic nervous system, helps to bring your body back to resting state.
No matter what we fear, the response is the same. It doesn't matter if it is the sound of an intruder, a loud crash in a scary movie, or seeing a sketchy person walking near your home. These all create the same reaction in the body. This is pretty amazing if you think about it. We have the same reaction to a scary clown in a movie that we did thousands of years ago when cavemen saw a tiger or a lion. That same fight or flight response occurred. Although we no longer fear the same things, this elicited response is the same. Still not buying it? Think of yourself being involved in a car accident. Just thinking about it, your body may begin the fear response. Once your body realizes that there is no real threat, you will not be on high alert anymore, unless it was a particularly traumatizing experience or event. For example, when I recall a particularly horrifying or traumatizing past event, such as bungee jumping off a bridge, my heart races like the moment I stood on the platform.
First things first, I'm the realest. Drop this and let the whole world feel it. Let them feel it. And I'm still in the murder business. I can hold you down like I'm giving lessons in physics.
Although I was safe in this situation, it is a legitimate fear because the equipment could have malfunctioned and something very bad could have potentially occurred. Now think of a time when you were watching a scary movie. This probably frightened you. You may have even jumped back a little bit. This is a movie, so there cannot possibly be any legitimate threat in this situation. However, the body reacts in the same way as it would for any other real-life scary situation that you have found yourself in. Let's look at the mental impact of each type of fear. Actual fear, like that exhibited when bungee jumping, can have several short-term and long-term effects. The specific effects for each person can vary slightly. However, individuals may experience terror, anger, guilt, shame, anxiety, or depression. Long-term effects include not learning how to cope with the situation that you fear. Sometimes individuals regress back and deal with their fear the way they did when they were young. Cinematic fear has some of the same mental effects as well. Short-term effects include the same feelings of terror, anger, anxiety, or depression. Positive effects of horror movies include that they can make you more creative. According to Dr. Glenn Sparks, a professor of communication at Purdue University who studies the effects of horror films on viewers' physiology, the reason our brain sees these types of fear as the same is because the brain hasn't really adapted to the new technology of movies. In conclusion, cinematic horror is just as horrifying and intimidating as authentic fear. The same biological reactions that occur for each of these forms of fear are just further proof that all fear is the same. Our brains have not evolved enough to react differently to all of these different types of fear yet.